like whispers carried on the wind. Stories untold begin to bridge the spaces between our faces, where concrete arts learn to bloom. In this sacred room, we find rivers of peace flow through. In the silence between the storm, oh storm, seeds are planted, oh planted. In the silence between the storm, oh storm, love is chanted, oh chanted. Children's laughter.
There exists a peculiar phenomenon in contemporary human interaction that most individuals remain entirely unaware of. It manifests as an incessant compulsion to rationalize one's every move, emotion, and decision. This behavioral pattern appears innocent enough on the surface, perhaps even considerate, yet beneath this facade of courtesy lies something far more troubling, a profound psychological fracture that shapes the very core of how we relate to ourselves and others. Carl Jung, the pioneering figure in depth psychology, recognized this perpetual need for self-justification as a clear indicator of something deeply amiss within the human psyche. He observed that when individuals find themselves constantly attempting to validate their feelings, choices, and reactions to others, they reveal a fundamental disconnection from their authentic selves. This relentless drive to make others comprehend our inner world stems from a much deeper wound, the unconscious belief that our existence requires external permission. The roots of this compulsive behavior often trace back to environments where emotional authenticity was systematically undermined. In these settings, typically during formative years, a child's genuine emotional expressions are met with dismissal, ridicule, or outright denial. The young person learns that their internal reality holds no inherent value unless it can be understood, accepted, or approved by others. Over time, this internalized message becomes an invisible cage, trapping the individual in a perpetual state of seeking validation for their most basic human experiences. When adults find themselves caught in this cycle of endless explanation, they are unconsciously attempting to ward off the specter of rejection, criticism, or abandonment. They operate under the illusion that if others can understand their reasoning, perhaps judgment will be withheld, connection will be preserved, and emotional safety will be maintained. This represents a desperate attempt to manipulate external perception as a means of ensuring belonging and psychological security. However, this constant striving for understanding exacts a tremendous cost: the gradual erosion of personal autonomy. When our focus becomes fixated on external validation, we begin to abandon our internal compass. Actions are no longer taken from a place of authentic conviction, but rather from a need to justify ourselves to avoid misunderstanding. Emotions are no longer felt freely, but are instead filtered through the lens of how others might perceive them. Slowly, life becomes a performance rather than an authentic expression, with the audience wielding more power than the actor. Jung identified this phenomenon as a significant barrier to what he termed individuation, the process through which a person becomes truly whole and authentic. The harsh reality is that genuine inner freedom cannot coexist with the compulsive need to explain oneself. Each justification represents a subtle form of submission, an implicit statement that one's existence requires external authorization. This dynamic represents more than mere social conditioning or politeness. It reflects a deep psychological wound embedded within the very foundation of identity. Jung understood that this compulsion for self-explanation serves as a symptom, a manifestation of the unconscious belief that one's worth depends entirely on external validation. This wound typically forms during childhood, in environments where a young person's subjective experience is consistently invalidated. When children express sadness only to be told they are being overly dramatic, when they display anger and are labeled as difficult, when they reveal fear and receive mockery in return, they begin to internalize a devastating message that their emotional reality is fundamentally flawed. They can only trust the responses of others to determine what is acceptable to feel or express. Over time, children develop sophisticated defense mechanisms, learning that comprehensive explanations might shield them from punishment, rejection, or ridicule. Thus begins a pattern that extends well into adulthood, the endless justification of every feeling, every choice, every reaction, as though a compelling argument were necessary to earn the right to exist authentically. At the heart of this wound lies the loss of internal authority. The individual no longer recognizes themselves as someone whose experience holds inherent validity. They become dependent on external observers to confirm whether their lived reality deserves legitimacy. This creates a psychological state of chronic submission, where self-worth is constructed not from within, but from reflections in the eyes of others. This dynamic operates largely below the threshold of consciousness. Those trapped within this pattern often fail to recognize that they are constantly attempting to convince others that their emotions are reasonable, their decisions logical, their behaviors justified. Behind every explanation lurks a hidden fear, the terror of being rejected simply for being who they truly are. Jung emphasized that every individual must eventually confront this inherited internal structure. Until they do, they remain prisoners of values, judgments, and expectations internalized from childhood authority figures. The person becomes a reflection of what others might approve of, rather than an expression of their authentic self. This compulsive self-explanation therefore represents a form of self-abandonment, the act of betraying one's own truth to make it more palatable to others. Healing begins with the recognition that permission to exist is not required, that emotions, regardless of how intense or contradictory they may appear, need no justification to deserve acknowledgement. Yet this awakening does not occur without difficulty. When individuals begin to resist the impulse to justify themselves, the resulting silence can feel deeply unsettling, revealing the emptiness left by the absence of genuine internal authority. Compulsive self-explanation transcends mere defensive behavior. It represents a continuous act of self-betrayal. This betrayal occurs quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet its corrosive effects run deep.
And we can be one world. It's gonna take some change, but we're not strange. We bleed the same, share the same pain. 'Cause walls divide us all, but together we stand tall. And we are one world. It's gonna take some hope, hope for every heart, heart. It's gonna take some hope, hope for every heart, heart. Different colors, different names, but we're playing the same game. Hand in hand, we'll find our way to a brighter, peaceful takes some trust, trust between us all.
Jung recognized that each time individuals reshape their words to avoid displeasure, conceal their emotions to maintain harmony, or suppress their authentic responses to avoid judgment, they distance themselves further from their true nature. This internal betrayal does not manifest as a dramatic rupture with the self. Instead, it unfolds gradually through countless small compromises made daily in the name of acceptance. It occurs when laughter is feigned to appear sociable, when agreement is given while meaning disagreement to avoid seeming selfish, when sadness is disguised as mere fatigue to avoid being perceived as burdensome, when anger is masked as rationality to prevent appearing immature. With each small concession made in pursuit of acceptance, a fragment of the soul is abandoned. Jung identified this pattern as a direct manifestation of an ego disconnected from the self. The ego, which should serve as the functional center of consciousness, instead becomes enslaved to external approval, constantly reconfiguring itself to become what others wish to see. In this endless adaptation, individuals lose touch with their authentic selves. They cease listening to their intuition, begin doubting their feelings, and question their most genuine motivations. Uncertainty replaces inner confidence, and self-trust erodes. This process of self-abandonment proves particularly insidious because society often rewards it. Those who adapt well, who explain themselves effectively, who avoid conflicts and maintain agreeable dispositions, frequently receive praise. Yet beneath this artificial harmony often lies profound emotional exhaustion, the weariness of those who live for others while having lost the ability to hear themselves. Jung maintained that this internal fragmentation serves as a primary source of neurosis. When the ego becomes too separated from the self, the symbolic center of psychic wholeness, symptoms emerge including chronic anxiety, existential crises, persistent emptiness, decision-making paralysis, and diminished self-regard. The soul cries out to be heard, but has been silenced in the name of social conformity. Ultimately, the fundamental question becomes clear: whose life is this? As long as constant approval is sought to feel, think, or act, existence remains merely a performance, an edited version of truth. One becomes a character in someone else's narrative, rather than the author of their own story. Breaking this cycle of self-betrayal requires reclaiming internal authority, developing the capacity to stand by one's truth even when it remains misunderstood, even when it creates discomfort, even when it challenges expectations. This marks the beginning of true individuation, becoming whole even if it means disappointing others. For Jung, authentic psychological freedom emerges not from social acceptance or external understanding, but from the development of internal authority. This concept, central to his theory of individuation, represents an individual's ability to validate their own subjective experience without depending on others' approval. It marks the moment when the question shifts from, "Will they understand what I feel?" to, "It doesn't matter if they understand, this is true for me." Internal authority stands in direct opposition to compulsive self-explanation. While the latter emerges from insecurity and the need to justify every step to gain acceptance, internal authority arises from the deep conviction that one's truth requires no negotiation. This shift transcends the merely intellectual. It represents an existential transformation, a fundamental change in the psyche's center of gravity, from the periphery of external approval back to the center of the self. This transition demands considerable courage, for by ceasing to explain oneself, the individual directly confronts fears of abandonment, judgment, and exclusion. Jung spoke of individuation requiring passage through the desert of inner solitude, that moment when one maintains a boundary without guilt, changes their mind without justification, ends a conversation without explanation, not from arrogance, but simply because nothing is owed to anyone for the right to exist. Developing this authority does not mean becoming insensitive or closed to dialogue. Rather, it means no longer needing to plead for understanding. Truth is offered as a gift, not presented as a petition for acceptance. Communication transforms from performance into authentic expression, the difference between speaking to gain approval and speaking to remain true. In practice, internal authority manifests through small daily acts of integrity, maintaining silence in the face of provocation, firmly stating, "That doesn't resonate with me," without needing to explain why, refusing to participate in emotional games requiring constant position justification, and above all, possessing the ability to endure the discomfort of being misunderstood while remaining whole. Jung believed this represents one of the most crucial moments in psychological development, the instant when individuals cease outsourcing their self-esteem and begin recognizing it as something arising from within. This transition proves both symbolic and powerful, marking the break with the old conditioned self that lives to please and the birth of a new self-rooted, autonomous, complete. However, this new stance does not receive universal welcome. The silence arising from internal authority often disturbs others. Those who previously benefited from another's insecurity begin losing control. Manipulators feel threatened. Relationships built on power imbalances start crumbling. This is precisely why everything changes when one stops explaining themselves. Silence, when emerging from integrity rather than omission, represents one of the most transformative forces within the human psyche. Jung understood this with remarkable clarity, recognizing silence not as an absence of response but as a presence of authority. When someone ceases justifying themselves compulsively, they are not merely avoiding conflicts or ending conversations, they are deactivating an entire system of psychological control that fed on their insecurity. This form of silence proves deeply unsettling because for those accustomed to expecting submission, explanation, and self-correction, the absence of justification registers as rebellion, and in essence, it is not the immature rebellion that demands attention through noise, but a quiet revolution, an implicit declaration that no explanations are owed for being authentic. Manipulative individuals who feed on others' doubt begin losing their advantage, because emotional manipulation only succeeds when vulnerability is apparent, when fear of misunderstanding, abandonment, or disappointment exists. Manipulation requires reactivity. Secure silence arising from internal authority presents an impenetrable barrier. It does not respond, justify, or dance to others' music. It simply exists, destabilizing any attempt at control. Furthermore, relationships that have always depended on submission, emotional, intellectual, or behavioral, begin revealing their true nature as fragile, one-sided, and based on imbalance. When one stops explaining themselves, the implicit pact of inferiority breaks. The position shifts from someone who needs acceptance to someone who already accepts themselves, fundamentally altering everything. Some people will distance themselves, and this signals not failure but realignment. Silence begins functioning as a filter, revealing who remained present out of genuine affinity versus those who stayed because control was easy to maintain. Jung emphasized that individuation often requires ruptures, and this distancing represents not punishment, but liberation. When justification of presence, boundaries, and choices ceases, attraction begins toward relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or dependence. However, preparation is necessary because stopping self-explanation also means confronting personal anxiety. The part conditioned over decades to believe understanding equals value will resist, wanting to return to justification, pleading for reconsideration. This is when silence becomes a spiritual practice, the conscious act of remaining whole despite discomfort. Silence transcends mere absence of words. It affirms being, refuses to put identity on trial. The more this silence is sustained, the more it transforms into presence, a presence emanating authority, commanding respect without raised voice, establishing boundaries without confrontation, existing without requiring approval. Yet, silence's impact extends beyond relationships with others, initiating profound internal psychological integration. When self-justification stops, self-listening begins. When emotion rationalization ceases, full feeling commences. External silence creates space for internal listening, opening the path to genuine transformation. Something magnetic exists about a person who feels no need to explain themselves, something that cannot be manufactured or forced. This quality reflects psychological integrity, the state of someone who no longer negotiates their essence to fit external expectations. Jung understood this integrity as one of individuation's most mature expressions, when individuals not only know their truth, but uphold it without hesitation, guilt, or need for validation. An integrated person does not beg to be understood. They communicate and express but do not convince, because they do not operate from the premise that their existence requires justification. Their words emerge from a solid center rather than hidden deficiency. This fundamentally changes how they are perceived, as the world treats with greater respect those who treat themselves respectfully. Self-respect begins when negotiation of what is essential within oneself ceases. Psychological integrity does not mean inflexibility, but coherence, the ability to maintain an internal line of truth despite external pressure. It manifests when uncomfortable feelings arise in situations, and even without rational explanation, those feelings are trusted. No evidence need be presented or elaborate arguments constructed. Simply stating, "This does not resonate with me," suffices. This stance, appearing simple, proves revolutionary in a world where most live disconnected from themselves, making decisions based on others' opinions, ignoring feelings for fear of seeming too sensitive, violating boundaries with forced smiles to avoid seeming difficult. Integrity opposes this fragmentation. It represents the art of remaining whole, of not fragmenting to please, of not hiding to avoid conflict. Jung knew that true transformation occurs not through learning more theories, but through embodying a new life stance. This stance begins with refusing to justify oneself, because every compulsive justification carries camouflaged insecurity, asking, "Am I enough?" The integrated person no longer poses this question. They know they are, even when the world insists otherwise. Here lies the paradox. The less approval is sought, the more respect is evoked, because integrity possesses weight, density, presence. Without speaking a word, a centered person can alter environmental dynamics. They need prove nothing. Their internal coherence communicates everything. Such people do not beg for space, they occupy it. They do not react from insecurity, they act from alignment. This integrity only becomes possible when self-betrayal ceases, when molding oneself for acceptance stops, when permission is granted to feel, choose, and act even without understanding. This requires practice, presence, and self-knowledge, but above all, courage to take responsibility for one's existence without blame or outsourcing value. When this integrity settles, effects prove profound. Relationships transform, professional positioning changes, self-perception clarifies, anxiety diminishes. The need to control others' thoughts disappears because living for understanding ends and living for truth begins. Something even deeper occurs, not only in world relations, but in what begins to emanate. When self-justification stops, a new energy emerges, that of someone in self-control. This energy receives unconscious recognition from everyone nearby, creating an invisible shift where the world begins treating one as someone who does not negotiate. When a person stops explaining themselves, everything transforms, not just internally, but externally. A new frequency begins transmission, no longer pleading, "Please understand me," but emanating, "I know who I am and require no permission." The world inevitably responds accordingly. Jung understood that the human psyche operates through energy, presence, and internal structure rather than rational justifications. Those constantly seeking understanding emit vibrations of submission and doubt. Those who cease explaining themselves emit strength, clarity, and authority. This is not about becoming arrogant, but finally becoming whole. People begin listening differently. Unbalanced relationships lose meaning. Dynamics involving submission, predictability, and easy control simply collapse. Not through fighting, but through unavailability to play the same role. Silence changes relationship configurations by communicating what was once begged for, declaring, "I am not here to be shaped, I am here to be." From this foundation, different connections emerge, deeper, more honest, more aligned with who one has become. Respect begins from within, and the first step involves ceasing to justify one's existence. This journey requires presence, because in moments of doubt, the impulse to explain will return. It will seem safer to please, easier to yield. In those moments, remembering becomes crucial. Every silenced explanation reaffirms the self, consolidates integrity, and claims rightful place in the world, not as someone begging for space, but as someone who already knows they belong. The transformation is complete when silence becomes not absence, but affirmation, when the refusal to put identity on trial becomes a statement of inherent worth. This is the liberation Jung spoke of, the freedom that comes not from external permission, but from internal authority, not from being understood, but from understanding oneself so completely that explanation becomes unnecessary. In this silence, we find not emptiness, but fullness, not withdrawal, but engagement, not defensiveness, but strength. We discover that the most powerful statement we can make is sometimes no statement at all, just the quiet confidence of existing authentically in a world that constantly asks us to be otherwise. The architecture of emotional invalidation. Jung's extensive clinical work revealed that compulsive self-explanation rarely emerges spontaneously or as an isolated behavioral quirk. Instead, it develops through systematic patterns of emotional invalidation that typically begin in early childhood and continue through formative relationships. These patterns create what Jung termed developmental trauma, not necessarily dramatic or obvious abuse, but the accumulation of experiences where a person's authentic responses are consistently treated as problematic, excessive, inappropriate, or requiring correction. Emotional invalidation operates through several key mechanisms that Jung identified through his therapeutic work. The first and perhaps most fundamental is response dismissal, where genuine emotional reactions are minimized, denied, or treated as insignificant rather than acknowledged as valid information about the person's experience. When a child's sadness is met with, "You're being too dramatic," their anger with, "You're overreacting," or their fear with, "That's silly," they receive a devastating message that their authentic emotional responses are somehow defective or untrustworthy. This dismissal creates what Jung called emotional amnesia. a gradual forgetting of one's genuine responses in favor of responses that others find more acceptable. The individual learns to distrust their natural emotional wisdom, treating their feelings as obstacles to be managed rather than valuable sources of information about their experience and needs. The second mechanism Jung identified is response substitution, where individuals are taught to replace their genuine feelings with more appropriate alternatives. Fear should become caution, anger should become disappointment, excitement should become measured optimism, sadness should become acceptance. This systematic replacement teaches the developing psyche to edit its natural responses before they can even be fully experienced, creating an internal censorship system that operates continuously. Response substitution is particularly damaging because it prevents individuals from learning to work with their authentic emotional responses constructively. Instead of learning that anger can provide valuable information about boundary violations, or that fear can offer important guidance about potential dangers, they learn to suppress these responses entirely, or transform them into emotions that feel safer but carry less information and energy. The third mechanism is conditional acceptance, where love, approval, and belonging are made contingent upon emotional compliance. The developing person learns that acceptance depends not on being authentic, but on being emotionally acceptable to others. This creates what Jung called love contingency, the unconscious belief that love must be earned through performance rather than received as a natural response to authentic being. Love contingency is particularly destructive because it attacks the very foundation of self-worth. Instead of developing the secure sense that they are lovable as they are, individuals develop the anxious belief that they must constantly prove their worthiness through appropriate responses and behaviors. This sets up a lifetime pattern of performing acceptability rather than expressing authenticity. Jung also identified a fourth mechanism, response punishment, where authentic emotional expressions are met with consequences designed to discourage their repetition. These consequences can range from withdrawal of attention and affection to more active forms of shaming, criticizing, or punishing. The child learns that certain aspects of their authentic self are not just unacceptable, but actually dangerous to express. Response punishment creates what Jung termed shadow formation, the relegation of authentic aspects of personality to the unconscious, where they continue to exist but remain hidden from conscious expression. These shadow aspects don't disappear. They accumulate energy and eventually find indirect or destructive ways to manifest, often creating internal conflict and external relationship problems. These invalidating experiences create lasting psychological structures that Jung called internal working models, unconscious templates that shape how individuals interpret and respond to emotional experiences throughout their lives. These models operate automatically, scanning emotional responses for potential problems and editing them before expression to minimize the risk of invalidation or rejection. The internal working models created by emotional invalidation typically include several key components. First is the inadequacy assumption, the unconscious belief that one's natural responses are somehow insufficient or problematic. Second is the danger assessment, the automatic evaluation of emotional expression for potential negative consequences. Third is the modification imperative, the compulsive need to edit responses to make them more acceptable to others. These models create what Jung observed as a fundamental split in the personality between the authentic self, which continues to have genuine responses, and the adapted self, which presents modified versions designed for external consumption. This split requires enormous psychological energy to maintain and inevitably leads to various forms of psychological distress, including anxiety, depression, relationship problems, and existential emptiness. Jung recognized that emotional invalidation is often perpetuated unconsciously by well-meaning caregivers who themselves experience similar invalidation in their development. Parents who are taught to distrust their emotions pass this distrust to their children, not from malice but from their own unhealed wounds. Teachers who learn that emotional expression is disruptive or inappropriate pass these beliefs to students. This creates what Jung called intergenerational transmission of emotional invalidation patterns. The cultural context amplifies these individual patterns. Educational systems that prioritize compliance over authentic expression, workplaces that reward emotional suppression over genuine communication, and social environments that value agreeableness over honesty all reinforce the invalidation messages that individuals received in their families of origin. Jung also observed that emotional invalidation creates what he termed validation-seeking behavior, compulsive patterns of seeking external confirmation for internal experiences. The individual who learned that their emotions are untrustworthy becomes addicted to others' validation of their responses, unable to trust their own experience without external confirmation. This validation seeking creates a paradoxical situation where the more approval one seeks, the less authentic approval one receives. Others respond to the performed version of the person rather than their genuine nature, leaving the individual feeling loved for who they pretend to be rather than who they actually are. The architecture of emotional invalidation thus creates a comprehensive system of self-betrayal that can govern entire lifetimes. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial for recognizing how compulsive explanation develops and, more importantly, for identifying the specific patterns that need to be addressed in the healing process. Jung's therapeutic approach focused on helping individuals recognize these patterns, understand their origins, and gradually develop the capacity to trust their authentic responses again. This process requires not just intellectual understanding but emotional re-education, learning to experience and express genuine responses in relationships that can handle and appreciate authenticity. The neurological foundations of self-betrayal. While Jung's original work predated modern neuroscience, contemporary research has validated many of his observations about how emotional invalidation creates lasting changes in psychological functioning. The neurological foundations of self-betrayal involve specific changes in brain structure and function that occur when individuals chronically suppress authentic responses in favor of socially acceptable alternatives. The human brain develops through interaction with the environment, particularly the social environment. When children experience consistent emotional invalidation, their developing nervous systems adapt by creating neural pathways that prioritize social approval over authentic expression. These adaptations involve multiple brain systems working in concert to monitor, evaluate, and modify responses before they reach conscious awareness or external expression. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions including decision-making and emotional regulation, develops enhanced capacity for response monitoring and modification. This creates what neuroscientists call cognitive control, the ability to override automatic responses in service of social goals. While this capacity can be adaptive in appropriate contexts, when it becomes the primary mode of emotional functioning, it creates chronic suppression of authentic responses. The anterior cingulate cortex, which plays a crucial role in emotional awareness and conflict monitoring, becomes hyperactive in individuals with chronic self-betrayal patterns. This hyperactivation represents the brain's attempt to constantly monitor for potential conflicts between authentic responses and social expectations. The individual develops what Jung called internal vigilance, a chronic state of monitoring their responses for potential problems. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, become sensitized to social threats in individuals who have experienced emotional invalidation. Social disapproval, criticism, or even potential rejection activates the same threat detection systems that respond to physical danger. This creates a state where authentic expression feels literally dangerous, triggering fight or flight responses that make self-betrayal feel like self-protection. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation and retrieval, shows alterations in individuals with chronic self-betrayal patterns. These changes affect both the encoding and retrieval of emotional memories, making it difficult to access examples of times when authentic expression was received positively. This creates a biased memory system that overemphasizes experiences of invalidation while underemphasizing experiences of acceptance. Mirror neuron systems, which help us understand and empathize with others, become overdeveloped in individuals who chronically modify their responses for others' comfort. While empathy is generally positive, hyperempathy can become problematic when it consistently overrides self-awareness and authentic expression. The individual becomes expert at reading others' needs while becoming foreign to their own. The default mode network, active during rest and introspection, shows altered patterns in individuals with chronic self-betrayal. Instead of engaging in natural self-reflection and integration, this network becomes occupied with rehearsing social interactions, anticipating others' responses, and planning performance strategies. This prevents the natural self-integration that occurs during rest and reflection. Neurotransmitter systems also adapt to chronic self-betrayal patterns. Dopamine, associated with reward and motivation, becomes more responsive to external validation than to authentic expression. The individual's reward system literally adapts to prioritize others' approval over personal satisfaction or authentic accomplishment. Serotonin, crucial for mood regulation and social functioning, shows altered patterns in individuals who chronically suppress authentic responses. Low serotonin is associated with increased sensitivity to social rejection and greater tendency toward mood disturbances, both common features of chronic self-betrayal patterns. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, becomes dysregulated in individuals who perform relationship rather than engaging authentically. While oxytocin normally facilitates genuine social bonding, chronic performance can create artificial bonding based on others' appreciation for our personas rather than our authentic selves. The stress hormone cortisol remains chronically elevated in individuals who constantly monitor and modify their responses for others' approval. This chronic elevation contributes to the physical and emotional exhaustion that Jung observed in individuals trapped in performance patterns. These neurological adaptations create what contemporary neuroscience calls neural loops, established patterns of brain activity that become increasingly automatic over time. The individual develops neural superhighways for response monitoring, modification, and performance, while the neural pathways for authentic expression become less developed and accessible. However, neuroscience also confirms Jung's optimistic view that these patterns can be changed. The brain's neuroplasticity, its capacity to reorganize and create new neural pathways, means that individuals can develop new patterns of authentic expression with appropriate practice and support. This neuroplasticity provides the biological foundation for the psychological transformation that Jung observed in successful therapeutic work. The process of reclaiming authentic expression literally involves rewiring the brain to prioritize internal awareness over external approval, genuine expression over strategic performance, and authentic connection over approval seeking. This rewiring requires consistent practice and often therapeutic support, but it is achievable for individuals committed to reclaiming their authentic nature. Understanding the neurological foundations of self-betrayal helps explain why these patterns feel so automatic and why changing them requires sustained effort. It also provides hope by demonstrating that the same brain plasticity that created maladaptive patterns can be harnessed to create healthier ones. The developmental stages of self-explanation. Jung's longitudinal observations of human development revealed that compulsive self-explanation follows predictable stages, each building upon previous patterns while adding new layers of complexity. Understanding these developmental stages is crucial for recognizing how explanation patterns become entrenched and identifying the most effective intervention strategies for different stages of development. The first stage, which Jung called primary adaptation, typically occurs in early childhood, ages 2 to 7, when children first encounter systematic emotional invalidation. During this stage, the child's natural responses meet with disapproval, correction, or dismissal from significant caregivers. The child begins to develop primitive explanation strategies, simple attempts to make their responses more acceptable to others. During primary adaptation, children develop what Jung termed proto-explanations, early attempts to justify their authentic responses. A child might say, "I'm sad because," even when their sadness needs no external cause or justification. They learn to provide reasons for feelings that are simply natural human experiences. This represents the first surrender of emotional sovereignty, the beginning of treating authentic responses as requiring external validation. The child also begins to develop response anticipation, the ability to predict which responses will be well received and which will create problems. They start to modify their authentic responses before expressing them, creating an early internal editor that scans for potential disapproval. This editor becomes more sophisticated over time, but its basic function, protecting the child from invalidation by modifying authentic expression, remains consistent throughout development. The second stage, secondary elaboration, typically occurs during middle childhood, ages 7 to 12. When explanation patterns become more sophisticated and comprehensive. Children who have learned that their responses require justification begin developing complex reasoning systems to support their authentic expressions. They become skilled at building cases for their emotions, preferences, and choices. During secondary elaboration, children develop what Jung called justification systems, elaborate cognitive frameworks for making authentic responses acceptable to others. A child might develop extensive explanations for why they prefer solitary activities over group activities, why they feel afraid in certain situations, or why they make particular choices. These justification systems represent advanced forms of self-betrayal disguised as mature reasoning. Children at this stage also begin to internalize others' questioning of their responses, developing what Jung termed internal tribunals, unconscious court systems where authentic responses must be tried and justified before being allowed expression. These tribunals operate continuously in the background of consciousness, creating chronic anxiety about the acceptability of one's natural responses. The third stage, adolescent crystallization, occurs during teenage years, ages 12 to 18, when explanation patterns either become entrenched aspects of identity or begin to be questioned and modified. Adolescents with strong explanation patterns may develop what Jung called identity provisionally, a sense of self that depends entirely on others' approval and understanding. During adolescent crystallization, individuals either learn to rebel against invalidation patterns or become more deeply entrenched in them. Those who rebel may develop what Jung termed reactive authenticity, authentic expression that is primarily defined by opposition to others' expectations rather than genuine self-knowledge. While this represents movement toward authenticity, it can create new problems in relationships and social functioning. Those who become more entrenched develop what Jung called explanation virtuosity, highly sophisticated abilities to justify any response or choice in terms that others will find acceptable. These individuals become expert at reading social expectations and crafting explanations that meet those expectations while maintaining some connection to their authentic impulses. The fourth stage, adult consolidation, typically occurs in early adulthood, ages 18 to 30, when explanation patterns either become stable aspects of personality or undergo significant revision through life experiences that challenge their validity. Adults may develop what Jung termed explanation careers, professional and personal identities built around their ability to justify themselves effectively to others. During adult consolidation, individuals often encounter situations where their explanation patterns are either strongly reinforced or significantly challenged. Relationships, career experiences, and life transitions can either strengthen explanation dependencies or create opportunities for developing internal authority. The outcomes depend largely on whether individuals encounter accepting relationships that can handle their authenticity or continuing invalidation that reinforces performance patterns. Some adults develop what Jung called explanation fatigue, a growing awareness of how exhausting it is to constantly justify their existence to others. This fatigue can serve as motivation for developing more authentic patterns, but it can also lead to withdrawal or cynicism if individuals don't know how to change their patterns. The fifth stage, midlife reckoning, typically occurs during middle adulthood, ages 30 to 50, when the costs of chronic explanation become undeniable, and individuals must choose between continuing established patterns or undertaking the difficult work of developing authenticity. Jung observed that this stage often precipitates what is commonly called midlife crisis, a period of questioning established patterns and seeking more authentic ways of living. During midlife reckoning, individuals may experience what Jung called explanation breakdown, moments when their established patterns of justifying themselves no longer provide psychological relief or social benefits. These breakdowns can create crisis, but also opportunity for developing new patterns based on internal authority rather than external approval. Some individuals experience explanation rebellion during this stage, a sudden refusal to continue justifying themselves to others. While this can create relationship difficulties, it often represents a healthy assertion of psychological autonomy after decades of self-betrayal. The challenge is learning to be authentic without becoming reactive or defensive. The sixth and final stage, mature integration, represents the successful development of what Jung called authentic authority, the ability to express genuine responses without compulsive explanation, while remaining open to feedback and connection with others. This stage is characterized by the capacity to communicate without performing, to be vulnerable without seeking approval, and to maintain boundaries without defensive explanation. Mature integration involves what Jung termed explanation choice, the ability to choose when explanation serves genuine communication and when it serves approval seeking, with the freedom to choose authentic expression even when it risks misunderstanding or disapproval. This represents the culmination of psychological development in this domain. Understanding these developmental stages helps explain why explanation patterns can be so entrenched and why changing them often requires sustained effort over extended periods. It also provides hope by demonstrating that development can continue throughout life, with opportunities for growth and healing available at any stage. Jung's developmental framework suggests that intervention strategies should be tailored to the individual's developmental stage, with earlier stages requiring more support and structure, while later stages can handle more challenging approaches to developing authenticity. Complex formation and autonomous functioning. Jung's theory of complexes provides crucial insight into how compulsive self-explanation becomes an autonomous psychological function that operates largely outside conscious control. A complex in Jungian psychology represents a cluster of emotionally charged ideas, images, and experiences that have become organized around a central theme and gained semi-independent functioning within the psyche. The explanation complex forms when experiences of emotional invalidation become organized around the central theme that authentic responses require external justification. This complex includes emotional components, anxiety about disapproval, relief from explanation, cognitive components, beliefs about the inadequacy of authentic responses, behavioral components, compulsive justification behaviors, and somatic components, physical tension and fatigue from chronic performance. Once formed, complexes operate with what Jung called autonomous functioning. They activate automatically in response to triggering situations and carry out their programmed responses without conscious direction. The explanation complex activates whenever the individual encounters situations that might involve potential disapproval or misunderstanding, immediately generating justification behaviors designed to prevent rejection. This autonomous functioning explains why individuals often feel compelled to explain themselves even when they consciously recognize that explanation is unnecessary. The complex operates faster than conscious awareness, generating explanation impulses before the individual can consciously choose their response. This creates the familiar experience of finding oneself in the middle of an elaborate justification without having consciously decided to provide one. Jung observed that complexes have their own intelligence. They can adapt their strategies to different situations while maintaining their core function. The explanation complex becomes increasingly sophisticated over time, developing nuanced abilities to read social situations and craft explanations that are most likely to be well received by particular audiences. Complexes also have what Jung called energetic autonomy. They draw energy from the psyche's total energy budget to maintain their functioning. The explanation complex requires significant psychological energy for constant monitoring of responses, crafting of justifications, and management of others' reactions. This energy expenditure contributes to the chronic fatigue that many individuals with strong explanation patterns experience. The explanation complex typically includes several subcomplexes that handle different aspects of the overall function. The monitoring subcomplex continuously scans internal responses for potential problems. The editing subcomplex modifies responses to make them more acceptable. The performance subcomplex manages the actual delivery of explanations. The feedback subcomplex evaluates others' responses to determine whether additional explanation is needed. These subcomplexes can become highly specialized and efficient, creating what Jung called complex virtuosity, the ability to perform complex psychological operations with remarkable skill and speed. Individuals with strong explanation complexes often become exceptionally skilled at reading social situations, anticipating others' concerns, and crafting responses that address those concerns preemptively. However, this virtuosity comes at a significant cost. The energy and attention devoted to complex functioning is unavailable for other psychological functions, including authentic self-expression, creative activity, and genuine relationship. The individual becomes skilled at managing others' perceptions while becoming increasingly disconnected from their own authentic experience. Jung also observed that complexes have defensive functions. They protect the psyche from experiences that feel dangerous or overwhelming. The explanation complex defends against the perceived danger of rejection, criticism, or abandonment by ensuring that authentic responses are always presented in acceptable packaging. This defensive function makes the complex feel necessary for psychological survival. The complex's defensive function explains why attempts to simply stop explaining oneself often fail. The complex activates its defensive responses to protect against the perceived danger of authentic expression, generating anxiety, guilt, or other uncomfortable emotions designed to motivate return to explanation patterns. Complexes also exhibit what Jung called projection tendencies. They influence how individuals perceive and interpret others' behavior. The explanation complex creates hypervigilance for signs of disapproval or criticism, leading individuals to perceive rejection or judgment even in neutral or positive responses from others. This projection reinforces the complex by providing apparent evidence that explanation is necessary for safety. Jung identified several factors that strengthen explanation complexes over time. Repetitive activation through repeated experiences of invalidation increases the complex's autonomy and power. Social reinforcement from environments that reward explanation provides energy for the complex's continued functioning. Absence of corrective experiences where authentic expression is well received prevents the complex from learning that explanation may be unnecessary. Conversely, Jung observed that certain experiences can weaken explanation complexes. Relationship experiences where authentic expression is consistently received with acceptance and appreciation can gradually reduce the complex's defensive intensity. Therapeutic relationships that can handle authentic responses without requiring justification can provide corrective experiences. Conscious practice of authentic expression in safe contexts can build confidence in the acceptability of unedited responses. The process of complex resolution involves what Jung called conscious confrontation, deliberately encountering the complex's activation while choosing different responses. This requires tremendous courage because it involves experiencing the anxiety and discomfort that the complex was designed to prevent. Jung's approach to complex work emphasized gradual exposure and conscious choice. Rather than attempting to eliminate the complex entirely, the goal is to bring its functioning under conscious control so that individuals can choose when explanation serves genuine communication versus when it serves unconscious defense against imagined threats. Understanding complex formation and functioning helps explain why changing explanation patterns requires more than intellectual understanding or conscious willpower. It requires sustained work to modify deeply entrenched psychological structures that have become integral to the personality's functioning. The therapeutic process involves not just recognizing the complex's operation, but developing new psychological structures that can serve the same protective functions through healthier means. This might involve developing genuine self-confidence to replace the false security of others' approval, or building authentic relationships that can handle genuine expression without requiring justification. The shadow dynamics of explanation. Jung's concept of the shadow, those aspects of personality that have been repressed or denied, plays a crucial role in understanding the deeper dynamics of compulsive self-explanation. When individuals chronically explain and justify their authentic responses, certain aspects of their genuine nature become relegated to the shadow, where they continue to exist but remain hidden from conscious expression. The explanation process creates what Jung called shadow formation by systematically suppressing aspects of authentic response that are deemed unacceptable. Spontaneous anger becomes controlled disappointment, genuine excitement becomes modulated enthusiasm, authentic fear becomes rationalized concern, and natural sadness becomes explained tiredness. The authentic responses don't disappear. They go underground into the shadow realm of the psyche. These shadow aspects accumulate energy over time, creating what Jung observed as shadow pressure, the psychological tension that builds when authentic aspects of personality are consistently denied expression. This pressure can manifest in various ways, including dreams where suppressed emotions appear with great intensity, unexpected emotional outbursts that seem inconsistent with the individual's usual presentation, or physical symptoms that express what words cannot. The shadow aspects of explanation patterns often include powerful emotions like rage at having to constantly justify oneself, grief over the loss of authentic expression, and terror about what might happen if one stopped performing acceptability. These emotions feel too dangerous to express directly, so they remain in the shadow where they influence behavior indirectly. Jung observed that shadow contents often appear in projection. We perceive in others the qualities we've denied in ourselves. Individuals with strong explanation patterns may feel inexplicably irritated by others who express themselves directly without justification. They may judge such people as arrogant, inconsiderate, or selfish, not recognizing that they're encountering their own suppressed capacity for direct, authentic expression. These projections serve multiple shadow functions. They allow indirect expression of suppressed aspects while maintaining the ego's identification with explanation patterns. They also reinforce the belief that authentic expression is problematic by providing apparent evidence that people who don't explain themselves are somehow flawed or dangerous. Shadow dynamics also explain why individuals often experience what Jung called explanation fatigue without consciously understanding its source. The constant energy expenditure required to suppress authentic responses and maintain acceptable presentations creates chronic depletion. The shadow's pressure for authentic expression conflicts with the ego's commitment to performance, creating internal tension that manifests as unexplained exhaustion. The shadow aspects of explanation patterns often include what Jung termed authentic authority, the natural capacity to trust one's own responses and express them without requiring external validation. This authority feels too dangerous to express directly because it challenges the fundamental beliefs upon which explanation patterns are built. Instead, it remains in the shadow, occasionally emerging in dreams or fantasy, but rarely in conscious behavior. Jung observed that shadow integration, the process of consciously acknowledging and incorporating denied aspects of personality, is essential for psychological wholeness. In the context of explanation patterns, shadow integration involves recognizing and gradually expressing the authentic responses that have been suppressed through years of justification and performance. This integration process is often triggered by what Jung called shadow encounters, situations where individuals come face to face with their own suppressed authenticity. These encounters might involve meeting someone who expresses themselves directly without apology, experiencing a crisis that strips away the luxury of performance, or simply reaching a point of exhaustion where explanation patterns can no longer be maintained. Shadow encounters often create what Jung termed enantiodromia, the psychological principle by which any extreme position will eventually transform into its opposite. Individuals who have spent years explaining themselves may suddenly refuse to provide any explanations at all. While this reactivity represents movement toward authenticity, it can create new problems if it becomes as rigid as the original explanation patterns. The goal of shadow work in this context is not to eliminate all consideration for others, but to integrate authentic authority with genuine compassion. This integration allows individuals to express their authentic responses directly while remaining sensitive to others' capacity to receive them. It enables honest communication without defensive explanation, vulnerable expression without apologetic justification. Jung identified several stages in the shadow integration process. Initial recognition involves becoming aware of the authentic responses that have been suppressed. Conscious acknowledgement requires accepting these responses as valid aspects of one's nature rather than problems to be solved. Gradual expression involves finding safe contexts to practice authentic communication without compulsive explanation. The shadow work also involves recognizing what Jung called shadow gifts, positive aspects of personality that were suppressed along with problematic ones. Many individuals discover that their capacity for joy, creativity, spontaneity, and genuine intimacy was suppressed along with emotions deemed unacceptable. Reclaiming these shadow gifts often provides the energy and motivation necessary for continuing the difficult work of developing authenticity. Shadow integration in explanation patterns often reveals what Jung termed authentic anger, righteous indignation about having spent years betraying oneself for others' approval. This anger, while initially disturbing, often provides the energy necessary for establishing healthier boundaries and refusing to continue compulsive explanation patterns. The process also uncovers what Jung called authentic grief, sadness about the years spent performing rather than living, relationships built on false premises, and opportunities missed due to fear of authentic expression. This grief, while painful, represents the psyche's natural response to recognizing the costs of chronic self-betrayal. Jung emphasized that shadow integration must be approached gradually and with support. Attempting to express years of suppressed authenticity all at once can overwhelm both the individual and their relationships. The process requires what Jung called conscious suffering, willingness to experience the discomfort of authentic expression while learning to tolerate others' potential disapproval. Successful shadow integration in explanation patterns results in what Jung termed psychological wholeness, the ability to access and express the full range of authentic human responses while maintaining consideration for others and appropriate social functioning. This wholeness enables genuine communication without compulsive justification, authentic relationship without constant performance. Projection and introjection mechanisms. Jung's understanding of projection and introjection provides crucial insight into how explanation patterns become self-perpetuating systems that resist change even when individuals consciously recognize their problematic nature. These mechanisms operate unconsciously to maintain established patterns, while creating the illusion that these patterns are necessary responses to external reality rather than internal psychological structures. Projection, in Jungian psychology, occurs when unconscious contents are experienced as belonging to others rather than oneself. In explanation patterns, individuals project their own harsh self-judgment onto others, experiencing others as more critical and demanding of justification than they actually are. This projection creates a perceived external reality that seems to require constant explanation, making the pattern feel necessary for psychological and social survival. The projection mechanism works by taking internal psychological contents, particularly the harsh internal critic developed through experiences of emotional invalidation, and experiencing them as originating from external sources. The individual's internal voice that says, "Your responses are inadequate and require justification," gets projected onto bosses, friends, family members, and even strangers, who are then experienced as demanding explanation for authentic responses. This projection creates what Jung called psychological paranoia, not clinical paranoia, but a systematic distortion of social reality, where others are experienced as more judgmental and critical than they actually are. The individual becomes hypervigilant for signs of disapproval or criticism, often interpreting neutral or even positive responses as evidence of others' dissatisfaction with their authentic expression. Introjection, the complementary mechanism, involves taking external contents and experiencing them as internal. In explanation patterns, individuals introject others' real or imagined expectations and standards, making them part of their internal psychological structure. What began as external pressure to justify oneself becomes an internal compulsion that operates independent of external demands. The introjection process typically begins in childhood when individuals internalize caregivers' messages about the acceptability of authentic expression. A parent's repeated message that the child's emotions are too much becomes an internal voice that continues to monitor and criticize emotional expression long after the parent is no longer present. These introjected voices become what Jung called internal objects, psychological structures that carry the energy and authority of their external origins. These internal objects operate with tremendous power because they carry not just the content of original invalidating messages, but also the emotional intensity of early attachment relationships. The introjected critical parent continues to demand explanation with all the authority of the original relationship, making resistance to these demands feel like rebellion against essential emotional connections. Jung observed that projection and introjection create what he termed psychological closed systems, self-reinforcing patterns that generate their own evidence for their necessity. The projected criticism from others provides apparent external validation for internal beliefs about the need for explanation, while the introjected standards create internal pressure that drives explanation behaviors even in the absence of external demands. These closed systems are particularly resistant to change because they insulate themselves from corrective experiences. When others respond positively to authentic expression, this positive response is either not perceived due to hypervigilance for criticism, or explained away as temporary, anomalous, or somehow not representative of others' real feelings. The system maintains itself by selectively attending to information that confirms its premises while filtering out information that challenges them. The projection-introjection dynamic also creates what Jung called relational distortion, systematic misperceptions of relationship dynamics that maintain explanation patterns. Others are experienced as more demanding of explanation than they actually are, while one's own needs for authentic expression are experienced as selfish or unreasonable demands rather than legitimate human needs. Breaking free from these mechanisms requires what Jung termed projection withdrawal, the process of recognizing that internal psychological contents have been attributed to external sources and reclaiming responsibility for these contents. This process involves acknowledging that much of the perceived pressure to explain oneself comes from internal sources rather than external demands. Projection withdrawal in explanation patterns typically begins with recognition that others are not as interested in detailed justifications as the individual assumes. Many people actually prefer direct, authentic communication to elaborate explanations and may even find constant justification tiresome or off-putting. This recognition challenges the fundamental assumption that others require explanation for one's authentic responses. The withdrawal process also involves recognizing how one's own internal critic has been projected onto others, creating the illusion that external pressure for explanation exists when it may actually be primarily internal. This recognition can be initially disturbing because it reveals the extent to which one's social reality has been distorted by internal psychological processes. Introjection withdrawal involves what Jung called internal differentiation, learning to distinguish between one's own authentic values and standards versus those that have been internalized from others. This process requires examining beliefs about what responses are acceptable or unacceptable and questioning whether these beliefs serve authentic well-being or merely replicate childhood invalidation experiences. The withdrawal process often reveals what Jung termed psychological colonization, the extent to which internal psychological space has been occupied by others' real or imagined expectations. Individuals may discover that much of their mental activity is devoted to rehearsing explanations, anticipating others' responses, and crafting justifications rather than engaging in authentic self-reflection or creative thought. Jung observed that successful projection and introjection withdrawal creates psychological space for what he called authentic dialogue, communication that emerges from genuine internal experience rather than defensive reaction to projected criticism or introjected standards. This dialogue is characterized by directness without defensiveness, honesty without explanation, and vulnerability without justification. The withdrawal process also involves developing what Jung termed reality testing, the ability to distinguish between actual external feedback and projected internal contents. This involves paying careful attention to others' actual words and behaviors rather than interpreting everything through the lens of anticipated criticism or disapproval. Reality testing often reveals that others are more accepting of authentic expression than the individual expected, that direct communication is more effective than elaborate justification, and that relationships improve rather than deteriorate when explanation patterns are reduced. These discoveries provide corrective experiences that support continued movement away from projection and introjection patterns. Jung emphasized that projection and introjection withdrawal must be approached gradually because these mechanisms serve defensive functions. They protect against the anxiety of authentic expression by maintaining the illusion that explanation is necessary for safety. Removing these defenses too quickly can create overwhelming anxiety and trigger return to established patterns. The therapeutic process involves what Jung called conscious projection recognition, learning to identify moments when internal contents are being attributed to others and developing the capacity to question these attributions. This recognition creates choice points where individuals can choose to respond from authentic internal authority rather than react to projected criticism. Successful withdrawal from projection and introjection mechanisms results in what Jung termed psychological sovereignty, the experience of being the primary authority on one's own experience while remaining appropriately responsive to genuine feedback from others. This sovereignty enables authentic communication without compulsive explanation while maintaining genuine consideration for others' perspectives and feelings. The energetics of authenticity versus performance. Jung's understanding of psychological energy, which he termed libido, provides crucial insight into why authentic expression feels natural and energizing, while performance patterns create chronic depletion. According to Jungian psychology, the psyche operates as an energy system where energy flows naturally toward authentic expression, but must be forced toward inauthentic performance through conscious effort and psychological mechanisms. Authentic expression aligns with what Jung called the natural movement of libido, the psyche's inherent tendency to express its genuine contents in the world. When individuals respond authentically to situations, their psychological energy flows naturally from internal experience to external expression without requiring conscious effort or energy expenditure for editing, monitoring, or performance management. This natural flow creates what Jung observed as energetic satisfaction, the sense of vitality and aliveness that comes from expressing one's genuine nature. Authentic expression provides energy to the system rather than depleting it because it aligns with the psyche's natural functioning rather than working against it. In contrast, performance patterns require what Jung called energetic forcing, the conscious diversion of psychological energy from natural channels into artificial ones. When individuals suppress authentic responses and manufacture acceptable alternatives, they must use conscious effort to override natural psychological processes, creating chronic energy expenditure that depletes the system over time. Performance patterns also require what Jung termed energetic splitting, the division of psychological energy between authentic internal experience and performed external expression. Part of the individual's energy is devoted to experiencing authentic responses, while another part is simultaneously devoted to modifying these responses for external consumption. This splitting prevents the integration and satisfaction that comes from unified psychological functioning. Jung observed that the energy required for performance increases exponentially as the gap between authentic response and performed response widens. Minor modifications of authentic expression require relatively little energy, while major transformations of genuine responses into acceptable alternatives can consume enormous psychological resources. The energetic cost of performance is compounded by what Jung called maintenance energy, the ongoing psychological effort required to maintain consistent performances across time and relationships. Individuals must remember which versions of themselves they've presented to different people, monitor their consistency, and adjust their presentations to maintain coherent false identities. This maintenance energy explains why individuals with strong performance patterns often feel exhausted even when they haven't engaged in obviously demanding activities. The constant background effort of monitoring and managing their presentations drains psychological resources that would otherwise be available for creative, relational, and spiritual activities. Jung also identified what he termed resistance energy, the psychological effort required to suppress authentic responses that want natural expression. This resistance creates internal tension and conflict, as natural psychological processes are forced to operate against their inherent direction. The suppressed responses don't disappear, but continue to press for expression, requiring ongoing energy expenditure to maintain their suppression. The energetic dynamics help explain why individuals often experience what Jung called performance fatigue, a particular kind of tiredness that comes not from external demands, but from internal conflict between authentic impulses and performed responses. This fatigue cannot be relieved through rest alone because it stems from ongoing internal tension rather than external energy expenditure. Jung observed that performance patterns also create what he termed energetic fragmentation, the dispersion of psychological energy across multiple false identities rather than concentration into unified authentic expression. Instead of having access to their full energetic capacity for any given situation, individuals must divide their energy among various performance requirements. This fragmentation prevents access to what Jung called peak energetic states, moments of complete psychological integration where all of one's energy is aligned toward authentic expression. These states are characterized by exceptional creativity, clarity, effectiveness, and satisfaction, but they're impossible to achieve when energy is dispersed across performance maintenance. The energetic perspective also explains why authentic expression often feels risky or dangerous to individuals accustomed to performance patterns. Authentic expression requires what Jung termed energetic commitment, the willingness to invest one's full psychological energy in genuine response rather than hedging through performance strategies. This commitment feels vulnerable because it involves abandoning the false security that comes from controlling others' perceptions. However, Jung observed that this energetic commitment, while initially anxiety-provoking, ultimately provides far greater security than performance patterns. Authentic expression aligns with natural psychological processes, making it sustainable over long periods without depletion. It also tends to attract genuine positive responses from others, creating authentic security rather than the false security of managed impressions. Jung's therapeutic approach emphasized what he called energetic redirection, gradually shifting psychological energy from performance patterns toward authentic expression. This process involves recognizing where energy is being depleted through performance and consciously choosing to redirect that energy toward genuine response and expression. The redirection process typically begins with small experiments in authentic expression in relatively safe contexts. These experiments allow individuals to experience the energetic satisfaction of authenticity while building confidence in their capacity to handle others' responses to their genuine nature. Jung observed that successful energetic redirection creates positive feedback loops where authentic expression generates energy that supports further authentic expression. As individuals experience the vitality that comes from genuine response, they become motivated to continue reducing performance patterns and increasing authentic expression. The energetic perspective also explains why relationship patterns often change dramatically when individuals stop performing and start expressing authentically. Authentic expression carries what Jung called energetic magnetism, the natural attractiveness of someone who is genuinely present and aligned with their own nature. This magnetism tends to attract others who appreciate authenticity while naturally repelling those who are only comfortable with performance. Understanding the energetics of authenticity versus performance provides both explanation for why performance patterns are ultimately unsustainable and motivation for undertaking the challenging work of developing authentic expression. The promise of energetic vitality and satisfaction provides a compelling alternative to the chronic depletion of performance-based living. Jung's energetic framework suggests that the development of authenticity is not just psychologically healthy, but actually energetically necessary for sustainable human functioning. Performance patterns may provide short-term social benefits, but they inevitably lead to energetic depletion that undermines long-term psychological and physical health. Cultural and social reinforcement systems. Jung's analysis extended beyond individual psychology to examine how cultural and social systems reinforce explanation patterns while discouraging authentic expression. He recognized that individual psychological patterns cannot be understood apart from the cultural contexts that shape and maintain them, and that explanation compulsions are as much cultural phenomena as personal ones. Modern educational systems provide one of the most systematic reinforcements of explanation patterns. Students learn early that their responses, ideas, and expressions are subject to evaluation and must be justified according to external criteria. The educational emphasis on showing your work and explaining your reasoning teaches children that their natural responses are insufficient and require elaborate justification to be acceptable. While some aspects of educational explanation requirements serve legitimate pedagogical purposes, Jung observed that these systems often extend far beyond necessary instruction into unnecessary justification. Students learn to explain not just their problem-solving processes, but their preferences, their interests, and even their emotional responses, creating comprehensive patterns of seeking educational authority, approval for authentic expression. The grading and evaluation systems inherent in education reinforce the belief that external authorities are better judges of one's responses than one's own internal assessment. Students learn to value teachers' opinions of their work more than their own satisfaction with their expression, creating foundational patterns of external validation seeking that extend far beyond academic contexts. Professional environments often provide even more intensive reinforcement of explanation patterns. Many workplace cultures explicitly require that decisions, preferences, and actions be justified through elaborate documentation, presentations, and approval processes. While some professional justification serves legitimate accountability purposes, Jung observed that many workplace cultures extend these requirements into areas where they serve primarily to maintain hierarchical control rather than improve outcomes. The professional emphasis on stakeholder buy-in and consensus building can become sophisticated forms of explanation requirement, where authentic professional judgment must be translated into forms that satisfy various constituencies rather than expressed directly. This creates what Jung called professional inauthenticity, work environments where competence must be performed rather than simply demonstrated through effective action. Corporate cultures that prioritize team player attitudes often discourage direct, authentic expression while rewarding elaborately justified versions of genuine perspectives. Employees learn to present their ideas in forms that demonstrate consideration for multiple viewpoints rather than expressing their authentic professional judgment directly. Social media platforms have created unprecedented reinforcement systems for explanation patterns. The comment culture of online interaction pressures individuals to justify their posts, defend their perspectives, and explain their responses to an unlimited audience of potential critics. The public nature of online expression makes every authentic response subject to evaluation and criticism by strangers who have no investment in understanding or supporting the individual's authentic expression. The algorithmic amplification of controversial content means that authentic expressions that generate disagreement receive more visibility, creating systematic reinforcement for either controversial performance or elaborate explanation designed to prevent disagreement. This dynamic encourages either provocative inauthenticity or exhaustive justification while discouraging simple, authentic expression. Religious and spiritual communities, while often intending to support authentic expression, can inadvertently create powerful explanation requirements. Doctrinal requirements for belief justification, behavioral standards that require explanation when not met, and community expectations for spiritual performance can create sophisticated forms of authentic suppression disguised as spiritual development. Jung observed that religious communities often require members to explain their doubts, justify their questions, and defend their spiritual experiences according to established theological frameworks. This can prevent the authentic spiritual expression that genuine religious experience requires, while creating performance patterns that mimic spirituality without providing its energetic benefits. Family systems provide some of the most powerful and persistent reinforcement for explanation patterns. Families often develop implicit rules about which responses are acceptable and which require explanation or justification. Children learn family-specific explanation requirements and carry these patterns into adult relationships long after leaving their families of origin. Family reinforcement is particularly powerful because it operates through emotional attachment systems. The desire to maintain family belonging motivates individuals to continue explanation patterns, even when they recognize these patterns as problematic in other contexts. Family members may resist changes in explanation patterns because these changes disrupt established family dynamics and role assignments. Therapeutic and helping relationships can inadvertently reinforce explanation patterns when they focus excessively on insight and understanding rather than authentic expression and response. Therapy approaches that require extensive explanation of feelings and motivations can strengthen rather than challenge explanation compulsions, particularly when they position the therapist as an authority who must understand and approve the client's responses. Jung's own therapeutic approach emphasized what he called active imagination and direct engagement with unconscious contents rather than extensive explanation of psychological phenomena. He recognized that excessive therapeutic explanation could become another form of performance designed to gain therapeutic approval, rather than genuine exploration of authentic experience. Media and entertainment industries often reinforce explanation patterns by portraying characters who justify their actions extensively as sympathetic and admirable, while portraying characters who act authentically without explanation as problematic or dangerous. This cultural messaging reinforces the belief that good people explain themselves while problematic people act without justification. The news media's emphasis on both sides and extensive analysis can create cultural expectations that every position must be exhaustively justified rather than simply stated and demonstrated through action. This creates what Jung called cultural hyper-explanation, social environments where simple, authentic expression feels insufficient or irresponsible. Political discourse has become increasingly dominated by explanation requirements where positions must be defended through extensive argumentation rather than demonstrated through effective governance. This creates modeling for explanation-based rather than result-based evaluation of authenticity and competence. Understanding these cultural and social reinforcement systems helps explain why explanation patterns feel so normal and necessary. They are normal within cultures that systematically discourage authentic expression while rewarding elaborate justification. However, Jung emphasized that recognizing these cultural patterns creates the possibility of conscious choice about which cultural messages to internalize and which to resist. The development of authentic expression often requires what Jung called cultural individuation. The process of distinguishing between cultural requirements that serve genuine collective welfare and those that serve primarily to maintain control systems that discourage authentic individual expression. This cultural individuation doesn't involve rejecting all social considerations, but rather developing the discernment to recognize when explanation serves genuine communication and accountability versus when it serves unconscious control and suppression systems. The goal is to maintain appropriate social functioning while reclaiming the right to authentic expression that doesn't require elaborate justification to be acceptable. The therapeutic process of reclaiming authenticity. Jung's approach to therapeutic work with explanation patterns involved a carefully structured process designed to help individuals recognize their patterns, understand their origins, and gradually develop the capacity for authentic expression without compulsive justification. This process, which Jung called therapeutic individuation, requires both intellectual understanding and experiential re-education in authentic communication. The initial phase of therapeutic work focuses on what Jung termed pattern recognition, helping individuals become conscious of their explanation compulsions and their effects on daily functioning. This recognition often begins with simple awareness exercises where individuals monitor their communication patterns and notice when they provide explanations that weren't requested or necessary. Pattern recognition involves distinguishing between explanation that serves genuine communication versus explanation that serves anxiety management or approval seeking. Individuals learn to recognize the internal felt sense that accompanies each type of explanation. Genuine communication feels natural and energizing, while compulsive explanation feels driven and depleting. This phase also involves historical exploration to understand how explanation patterns developed. Jung emphasized the importance of connecting current patterns to their developmental origins, not to blame caregivers or past circumstances, but to understand how adaptive strategies that once served survival functions may now interfere with authentic living. The historical exploration typically reveals what Jung called explanation templates, specific patterns learned in particular relationships that continue to operate in current situations. An individual might recognize that they explain their emotions in ways designed to prevent the criticism they received from a parent, or justify their professional decisions using language that would have satisfied a demanding teacher. The second phase involves what Jung termed experimental authentication, carefully structured experiences in authentic expression within the safety of the therapeutic relationship. This phase begins with very small experiments in direct communication without elaborate justification, allowing individuals to experience authentic expression in a context where it will be received with acceptance and understanding. These experiments help individuals develop what Jung called authenticity tolerance, the capacity to maintain authentic expression even when it feels uncomfortable or anxiety-provoking. Many individuals discover that their anxiety about authentic expression is largely conditioned rather than realistic, and that direct communication often receives better responses than elaborate justification. The therapeutic relationship itself becomes a laboratory for experimenting with authentic communication. Individuals practice expressing preferences, concerns, insights, and responses directly without extensive justification, learning to trust that their authentic expressions have value independent of their ability to explain or defend them. Jung emphasized the importance of what he called graduated exposure in this process. Individuals begin with relatively low-risk authentic expressions and gradually build confidence to handle more vulnerable or potentially controversial communications. This gradual approach prevents overwhelming anxiety that might cause retreat to established explanation patterns. The third phase focuses on relational integration, learning to maintain authentic expression in relationships outside the therapeutic context. This phase involves careful attention to which relationships can handle increased authenticity and which may require more gradual introduction of authentic communication patterns. Relational integration often reveals that many relationships are more capable of handling authentic expression than individuals initially believe. People who seem to require explanation and justification may actually prefer direct, honest communication and may have been responding to the individual's anxiety about authentic expression rather than demanding explanation themselves. However, this phase also involves recognizing that some relationships are genuinely incompatible with authentic expression. Jung called these authenticity-intolerant relationships, connections that require performance and explanation to maintain stability. Individuals must decide whether to modify these relationships, limit their depth, or end them entirely. The integration process includes developing what Jung termed boundary competence, the ability to maintain authentic expression while respecting others' capacity to receive and respond to authenticity. This involves learning to be genuine without being overwhelming, direct without being insensitive, and honest without being cruel. Boundary competence also involves learning to handle others' discomfort with authentic expression without automatically retreating to explanation patterns. Individuals learn that others' discomfort with authenticity often reflects their own struggles with authentic expression, rather than problems with the individual's communication. The fourth phase addresses systemic change, modifying life circumstances to support continued authentic expression while removing or reducing exposure to environments that require extensive performance and explanation. This might involve career changes, relationship modifications, or lifestyle adjustments that create more space for authentic living. Systemic change recognizes that individual psychological change must be supported by environmental conditions that allow new patterns to flourish. Individuals may need to seek work environments that value authentic contribution over political performance, or social contexts that appreciate genuine expression over strategic communication. This phase also involves developing what Jung called authenticity maintenance systems, ongoing practices and relationships that support continued authentic expression. These might include creative practices that encourage genuine expression, spiritual practices that connect individuals with their authentic nature, or relationships with people who appreciate and support authentic communication. Jung observed that the therapeutic process of reclaiming authenticity often progresses in cycles rather than linear stages. Individuals may experience periods of confident, authentic expression, followed by temporary returns to explanation patterns, particularly during times of stress or when encountering particularly challenging relationship situations. These temporary returns to old patterns don't represent failure, but rather normal aspects of psychological change. Jung called them authenticity spirals, cyclical returns to familiar patterns that gradually become less frequent and intense as new authentic patterns become more established and reliable. The therapeutic process also addresses what Jung termed authenticity grief, the sadness that often emerges as individuals recognize how much of their lives has been spent in performance rather than authentic expression. This grief represents a natural response to recognizing the costs of chronic self-betrayal and typically provides energy for continued commitment to authentic living. Successful completion of the therapeutic process results in what Jung called authentic integration, the ability to express genuine responses directly while maintaining appropriate social sensitivity and genuine care for others. This integration enables individuals to live from their authentic nature while contributing positively to their relationships and communities. The ultimate goal is not the elimination of all consideration for others, but the development of genuine consideration that emerges from authentic care rather than compulsive people-pleasing. Individuals learn to offer their authentic presence as a gift to their relationships rather than performing acceptability as a strategy for earning love. Practical exercises and interventions. Jung's therapeutic approach included specific exercises and interventions designed to help individuals develop authentic expression while gradually reducing their dependence on compulsive explanation. These practical techniques provide concrete methods for implementing the psychological insights of his theoretical framework. The explanation audit represents one of Jung's fundamental diagnostic exercises. Individuals spend 1 week carefully tracking their explanation behaviors, noting when they provide explanations, what triggers these explanations, how others respond, and how the explanations feel internally. This audit typically reveals that many explanations are unnecessary and may even hinder effective communication. The audit process involves distinguishing between requested explanation, where others specifically ask for clarification or justification, and voluntary explanation, where individuals provide justification without being asked. Most people discover that voluntary explanations represent the majority of their explanation behaviors, and often serve anxiety management rather than communication purposes. Participants in the explanation audit often discover what Jung called explanation patterns, specific situations, relationships, or topics that consistently trigger compulsive justification behaviors. These patterns provide valuable information about where explanation serves defensive functions rather than genuine communication needs. The direct statement practice involves gradually replacing elaborate explanations with simple, direct statements of preference, opinion, or decision. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry, I know this might sound selfish, but I was thinking maybe I might prefer to stay home tonight because I've had a long week and I'm feeling tired," individuals practice saying, "I'd prefer to stay home tonight." This practice typically generates significant anxiety initially because it feels abrupt or potentially offensive to communicate so directly. However, most individuals discover that others respond more positively to direct statements than to elaborate explanations, and that direct communication is actually more respectful of others' time and intelligence. The practice involves gradual progression from low-risk direct statements, preferences about neutral topics, to higher-risk communications, opinions about controversial subjects or decisions that might disappoint others. This graduated approach prevents overwhelming anxiety that might cause retreat to explanation patterns. The internal authority development exercise focuses on strengthening individuals' capacity to trust their own responses without requiring external validation. This involves daily practices in recognizing authentic responses before they get edited by internal explanation systems. One component involves what Jung called first response awareness, learning to identify the immediate, unedited response to situations before internal editing systems modify them for external consumption. Individuals practice noticing their authentic reaction to questions, requests, or situations before automatically calculating acceptable responses. Another component involves response validation practice, learning to treat authentic responses as valuable information, regardless of whether they seem socially acceptable or easily explained. Individuals practice saying, "This is my response," without immediately adding, "because," or "I know this might seem." The explanation substitution exercise involves replacing explanation behaviors with alternative responses that serve genuine communication without feeding compulsive justification patterns. Instead of explaining why they made particular choices, individuals practice describing their experience or sharing their perspective without defensive justification. For example, instead of explaining why they chose a particular restaurant, "I chose this place because I thought you might like it and it's not too expensive and the service is usually good." Individuals practice simple sharing. "I enjoy eating here," or "This seemed like a good option for tonight." The substitution practice helps individuals discover that genuine sharing often provides more useful information than elaborate explanation, while feeling more natural and requiring less energy to maintain. The boundary setting without explanation exercise addresses one of the most challenging aspects of reducing explanation patterns. Many individuals fear that setting boundaries without extensive justification will seem selfish or unreasonable. This exercise provides structured practice in maintaining boundaries through simple statements rather than elaborate defenses. The practice involves identifying current boundaries that individuals maintain through extensive explanation and experimenting with stating these boundaries directly, instead of, "I'm sorry, I can't work late tonight because I have family commitments and I promised my kids I'd be home for dinner." Individuals practice, "I'm not available to work late tonight." This exercise typically reveals that boundaries stated simply and directly are more respected than boundaries surrounded by elaborate justifications. Others seem to respond to the clarity and confidence of direct boundary statements rather than being convinced by explanatory arguments. The authentic response tolerance exercise involves gradually increasing individuals' capacity to maintain authentic expression, even when it feels uncomfortable or potentially problematic. This involves deliberate practice in expressing genuine responses without immediately modifying them based on others' real or imagined reactions. The exercise begins with expressing authentic responses in low-risk situations, preferences about neutral topics with supportive people, and gradually progresses to higher-risk expressions, controversial opinions or emotional responses with less predictable audiences. The goal is building confidence in the value and acceptability of authentic expression. Participants practice what Jung called response maintenance, continuing to express authentic responses even when others seem surprised, confused, or mildly disapproving. Most individuals discover that others adjust to authentic communication more quickly than expected, and often appreciate the honesty more than they initially assumed. The relationship sorting exercise helps individuals identify which relationships in their lives support authentic expression versus which require extensive performance and explanation. This assessment provides crucial information for deciding where to invest energy in authentic communication versus where to maintain more strategic interaction patterns. The sorting process involves evaluating current relationships based on several criteria: how accepting others are of authentic expression, how much energy is required to maintain the relationship, how genuine the mutual caring feels, and how much growth versus stagnation the relationship supports. This assessment often reveals that some relationships individuals thought were close and supportive actually require significant performance to maintain, while other relationships they had undervalued are actually quite capable of handling and appreciating authentic expression. The energy tracking exercise involves monitoring energy levels before and after different types of communication to provide concrete evidence of how explanation patterns affect vitality. Individuals track their energy after authentic expression versus after elaborate explanation or performance-based interaction. Most participants discover clear patterns where authentic expression, despite sometimes feeling risky, actually increases energy levels, while explanation-based communication consistently depletes energy. This provides compelling motivation for continuing to develop authentic communication patterns. The response choice practice involves developing conscious choice about when explanation serves genuine communication versus when it serves anxiety management. Individuals learn to pause before providing explanations and consciously choose whether justification is necessary or helpful in particular situations. This practice involves asking internal questions like, is this explanation serving genuine communication or my anxiety about others' approval? And what would happen if I simply stated my response without justification? These questions help individuals distinguish between appropriate social consideration and compulsive approval seeking. Jung emphasized that these exercises must be practiced consistently over extended periods to create lasting change in explanation patterns. The goal is not perfection, but gradual improvement in the capacity for authentic expression, while maintaining genuine care and consideration for others. Successful practice of these exercises typically results in what Jung called authentic confidence, the quiet assurance that comes from knowing one's responses have value independent of others' understanding or approval. This confidence enables genuine communication without defensive explanation, while maintaining openness to feedback and connection with others. The neuroscience of authentic expression. Contemporary neuroscience research has provided fascinating validation and extension of Jung's observations about the psychological and physiological benefits of authentic expression versus the costs of chronic performance patterns. Modern brain imaging and neurotransmitter studies reveal the specific neurological mechanisms through which authenticity supports health, while inauthenticity creates stress and depletion. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions, including emotional regulation and social behavior, shows distinctly different patterns of activation during authentic expression versus performed responses. During authentic expression, prefrontal activity is moderate and integrated with other brain regions, suggesting efficient neural processing that doesn't require excessive conscious effort or energy expenditure. In contrast, during performed responses that contradict authentic impulses, prefrontal cortex activity increases dramatically as this region works to suppress authentic responses while manufacturing acceptable alternatives. This hyperactivation represents the neurological substrate of the exhaustion that Jung observed in individuals with chronic explanation patterns. Brain imaging studies reveal that authentic expression activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a network of brain regions associated with self-referential processing, introspection, and integration of experience. This activation suggests that authentic expression supports the natural integration and consolidation functions that contribute to psychological coherence and well-being. Performance patterns, particularly those requiring significant suppression of authentic responses, show reduced default mode network activity, suggesting impaired capacity for self-integration and reflection. This may explain Jung's observation that individuals with chronic explanation patterns often lose touch with their authentic preferences and responses. The anterior cingulate cortex, crucial for conflict monitoring and emotional awareness, shows chronic hyperactivation in individuals with strong explanation patterns. This brain region continuously monitors for conflicts between authentic impulses and social expectations, creating the internal vigilance that Jung described as characteristic of explanation compulsions. This chronic hyperactivation of conflict monitoring systems creates what neuroscientists term allostatic load, the wear and tear on biological systems that results from chronic stress response activation. This provides the neurobiological explanation for the physical symptoms that often accompany chronic explanation patterns. Neurotransmitter systems also show distinct patterns associated with authentic versus performed expression. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, is released during authentic expression, creating the sense of vitality and satisfaction that Jung observed in genuine communication. This dopamine release reinforces authentic expression, making it naturally rewarding and sustainable. Performed responses that contradict authentic impulses show altered dopamine patterns, with reduced release during the performance itself, but potential dopamine spikes when external approval is received. This pattern creates what neuroscientists recognize as similar to addiction dynamics, where the behavior itself is not rewarding, but external validation provides intermittent reinforcement that maintains the pattern. Serotonin, crucial for mood regulation and social functioning, shows healthier patterns during authentic expression, contributing to the emotional stability and social ease that characterize genuine communication. Chronic performance patterns are associated with serotonin dysregulation, potentially contributing to the mood problems that often accompany explanation compulsions. The stress hormone cortisol shows dramatically different patterns during authentic versus performed responses. Authentic expression is associated with lower cortisol levels, reflecting the absence of internal conflict and the alignment with natural psychological processes. Performed responses, particularly those requiring significant suppression of authentic impulses, trigger cortisol release as the body responds to the internal conflict as a form of stress. Chronic elevation of cortisol due to ongoing performance patterns contributes to numerous health problems, including immune system suppression, digestive problems, sleep disturbances, and cognitive impairment. This provides the physiological explanation for the comprehensive health effects that Jung observed in individuals with chronic explanation patterns. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, shows interesting patterns in relation to authentic versus performed social interaction. Genuine, authentic expression that is received with acceptance and understanding triggers oxytocin release, supporting the formation of secure social bonds and contributing to overall well-being. However, performed social interaction designed to gain approval shows more complex oxytocin patterns. While the hormone may be released during successful performance, when approval is received, the underlying inauthenticity prevents the deep bonding that oxytocin normally supports. This may explain why individuals with strong performance patterns often feel lonely even when surrounded by people who approve of their presentations. The vagus nerve, crucial for the parasympathetic nervous system's rest and digest functions, shows healthier tone during authentic expression. Good vagal tone is associated with emotional regulation, social ease, and overall resilience. Authentic expression supports parasympathetic activation, contributing to the calm confidence that Jung observed in individuals who had developed internal authority. Chronic performance patterns, particularly those involving significant emotional suppression, are associated with reduced vagal tone and increased sympathetic nervous system activation. This creates the chronic tension and emotional dysregulation that often accompany explanation compulsions. Mirror neuron systems, which help us understand and empathize with others, show interesting patterns in relation to authentic versus performed expression. During genuine authentic interaction, mirror neuron systems activate naturally, supporting real empathy and connection. However, during strategic performance designed to manage others' reactions, these systems may become dysregulated as they attempt to mirror others while simultaneously suppressing authentic responses. This dysregulation may contribute to the social exhaustion that many individuals with performance patterns experience. Their brains are working overtime to maintain empathic connection while simultaneously suppressing authentic responses that would naturally emerge in genuine empathic interaction. The research on neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize and create new neural pathways, provides hope for individuals seeking to change chronic explanation patterns. Studies show that consistent practice of authentic expression literally rewires the brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with genuine communication, while allowing performance-related pathways to atrophy from disuse. This neuroplasticity research suggests that the therapeutic exercises Jung developed for reducing explanation patterns have measurable neurological effects. Practices that strengthen authentic expression create corresponding changes in brain structure and function that support continued authentic communication. The neuroscience research also reveals that the benefits of authentic expression extend beyond individual psychological health to include enhanced social connection and communication effectiveness. Brain-to-brain synchronization studies show that authentic communication creates better neural resonance between communicators than performed interaction, supporting Jung's observation that authenticity enhances rather than hinders genuine relationship. Understanding the neuroscience of authentic expression provides both explanation for why explanation patterns feel so automatic and compelling, and hope for their modification. The same brain plasticity that created these patterns through repeated practice can be harnessed to create healthier patterns of genuine expression and communication. Integration and transformation. The ultimate goal of Jung's approach to explanation patterns is not the elimination of all social consideration or the development of insensitive self-expression, but rather the integration of authentic communication with genuine care for others. This integration represents what Jung called mature authenticity, the capacity to express genuine responses while maintaining appropriate social sensitivity and contributing positively to collective human welfare. Integration begins with what Jung termed authenticity discernment, the ability to distinguish between situations where direct authentic expression serves genuine communication versus situations where some degree of modification or context consideration enhances rather than detracts from effective communication. This discernment develops through experience and conscious practice rather than through rigid rules or formulas. The discernment process involves recognizing that authentic expression doesn't mean expressing every authentic response in its raw, unprocessed form. Mature authenticity involves what Jung called conscious choice about how to express genuine responses in ways that honor both one's authentic nature and one's genuine care for others' well-being. This conscious choice differs fundamentally from compulsive explanation because it emerges from internal authority rather than external pressure. The integrated person chooses how to express their authenticity based on their own values and assessment of the situation rather than modifying their responses to avoid others' potential disapproval. Integration also involves developing what Jung termed response flexibility, the ability to access and express different aspects of one's authentic nature depending on what particular situations call forth. This flexibility emerges from psychological wholeness rather than performance strategy, allowing natural adaptation to varied circumstances while maintaining core authentic identity. The integrated person can be playful when play is appropriate, serious when gravity is called for, vulnerable when intimacy is possible, and strong when strength is needed. This flexibility represents authentic responsiveness to life's varied demands rather than performance of roles designed to manage others' reactions. Jung observed that integration often involves what he called authenticity expansion, the discovery that authentic nature is far richer and more varied than the limited performances that had previously defined social identity. As individuals stop constraining their expression to narrow ranges of acceptability, they often discover capacities, interests, and responses they had forgotten they possessed. This expansion can feel disorienting because it challenges established identity structures. Individuals may discover that their authentic nature includes aspects they had thought were incompatible. The capacity for both strength and vulnerability, both seriousness and playfulness, both independence and connection. Integration involves learning to honor this complexity rather than forcing artificial consistency. The integration process also addresses what Jung called relationship evolution, the natural changes that occur in relationships when one person begins expressing more authentically. Some relationships deepen and become more satisfying as both parties have permission to be more genuine. Others may become more superficial or end entirely if they were based primarily on mutual performance rather than genuine affinity. Jung recognized that this relationship evolution, while sometimes painful, is essential for psychological health and authentic living. Relationships that cannot handle one's authentic nature are ultimately unsustainable and prevent the deep satisfaction that comes from being known and loved for who one actually is, rather than who one pretends to be. The integration process includes developing what Jung termed authentic leadership, the capacity to influence and guide others through genuine presence and authentic expression, rather than through strategic communication and impression management. This leadership emerges naturally from internal authority and tends to be more effective and sustainable than leadership based on performance and positioning. Authentic leadership involves what Jung called modeling authenticity, demonstrating through one's own behavior that direct, honest communication is possible and beneficial. This modeling gives others permission to be more authentic in their own expression, creating positive ripple effects that extend far beyond individual psychological change. Integration also involves what Jung termed creative authenticity, the expression of authentic nature through creative endeavors that serve both personal fulfillment and collective contribution. As individuals reclaim energy that had been devoted to performance and explanation, this energy becomes available for creative expression that emerges from genuine inspiration rather than external expectations. Creative authenticity might manifest as artistic expression that reflects genuine vision rather than market demands, professional contributions that emerge from authentic expertise rather than political positioning, or community involvement that serves genuine values rather than social image management. Jung observed that the integration process often involves what he called authenticity cycles, periods of confident, authentic expression alternating with temporary returns to explanation patterns, particularly during times of stress or significant life transitions. These cycles represent normal aspects of psychological development rather than failures in the integration process. Understanding these cycles helps individuals maintain perspective during temporary setbacks and continue their commitment to authentic development, even when progress seems irregular or incomplete. Jung emphasized that psychological growth rarely follows linear patterns, and that temporary returns to familiar patterns often precede breakthrough moments in development. The integration process culminates in what Jung called authentic presence, a way of being in the world that naturally expresses one's genuine nature while contributing positively to collective human welfare. This presence is characterized by naturalness without artifice, confidence without arrogance, vulnerability without manipulation, and strength without domination. Authentic presence affects others not through strategic communication, but through the natural magnetism of someone who is genuinely comfortable with their own existence. This presence tends to evoke authentic responses in others, creating spaces where genuine human connection becomes possible. Jung's vision of successful integration extends beyond individual psychological health to include what he called collective authenticity, social environments where genuine expression is valued over strategic communication, where individual uniqueness is appreciated rather than suppressed, and where diverse, authentic perspectives contribute to collective wisdom rather than being homogenized into acceptable consensus. This collective authenticity represents Jung's ultimate hope for human civilization, that individual psychological development toward authenticity would gradually transform social structures to support rather than suppress genuine human expression. He believed that the healing of individual explanation compulsions contributes to the healing of collective systems that discourage authentic communication. The integration and transformation process requires what Jung called patience with becoming, the recognition that psychological development is a lifelong process that unfolds gradually through sustained commitment rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The goal is progress rather than perfection, growth rather than arrival at some final state of complete authenticity. Jung's framework suggests that the work of reclaiming authentic expression from explanation compulsions represents one of the most important contributions individuals can make to their own well-being and to collective human development. Each person who chooses authenticity over approval, genuine expression over strategic communication, creates possibilities for others to do the same. Conclusion: the revolutionary nature of authentic existence. Carl Jung's comprehensive analysis of compulsive self-explanation reveals both the depth of modern humanity's disconnection from authentic expression and the transformative potential that emerges when individuals reclaim their right to exist without external justification. His work demonstrates that what might appear to be simple behavioral patterns, the tendency to explain and justify our responses, actually reflect fundamental questions about human nature, social organization, and the possibilities for genuine connection and fulfillment. The explanation compulsion represents more than individual neurosis or personal insecurity. It reflects a comprehensive cultural and psychological crisis where authentic human expression has been systematically discouraged in favor of performance, where individual wisdom has been subordinated to collective approval, and where the natural authority of personal experience has been replaced by dependence on external validation. Jung's analysis reveals that this crisis operates at multiple levels simultaneously. Neurologically, explanation patterns create chronic stress and energy depletion, while authentic expression supports natural brain functioning and psychological integration. Developmentally, these patterns emerge from early experiences of emotional invalidation and become entrenched through social reinforcement systems that prioritize conformity over authenticity. Psychologically, explanation compulsions represent sophisticated forms of self-betrayal that prevent access to internal authority and genuine relationship. Culturally, they reflect educational, professional, and social systems that systematically discourage direct, authentic expression while rewarding elaborate justification and strategic communication. Yet Jung's work also reveals the revolutionary potential that emerges when individuals choose authentic expression over approval seeking. This choice represents what he called psychological courage, the willingness to risk others' misunderstanding in service of one's own psychological integrity. This courage transforms not just individual experience, but the social environments that authentic individuals inhabit. The development of authentic expression creates what Jung termed authenticity magnetism, the natural attractiveness of someone who is genuinely comfortable with their own existence. This magnetism tends to evoke authentic responses in others while naturally discouraging relationships based on mutual performance and people-pleasing. Jung's therapeutic approach provides practical methods for recognizing explanation patterns, understanding their origins, and gradually developing the capacity for genuine expression without compulsive justification. These methods involve both intellectual understanding and experiential re-education in authentic communication, supported by relationships that can handle and appreciate genuine human expression. The integration of authentic expression with social consideration represents the culmination of Jung's vision. Individuals who can express their genuine nature while contributing positively to collective human welfare. This integration enables what Jung called mature authenticity, communication that serves both individual integrity and genuine connection with others. The neuroscience research that has emerged since Jung's original work provides compelling validation of his observations about the energetic and health benefits of authentic expression versus the costs of chronic performance. Modern brain imaging reveals the specific neurological mechanisms through which authenticity supports psychological and physical well-being, while explanation compulsions create stress and depletion. Understanding the neuroplasticity of these patterns provides hope for individuals seeking to change established explanation behaviors. The same brain plasticity that created these patterns through repeated practice can be harnessed to create healthier patterns of genuine expression and authentic communication. Jung's framework suggests that the work of reclaiming authentic expression represents one of the most important contributions individuals can make to both personal well-being and collective human development. Each person who chooses authenticity over approval creates possibilities for others to do the same, contributing to what Jung envisioned as the gradual transformation of human civilization toward greater support for genuine expression and authentic relationship. The explanation compulsion, once recognized and understood, becomes a doorway to psychological freedom rather than a prison of approval seeking. The same awareness that can identify these patterns can learn to choose authentic expression, creating lives characterized by genuine relationship, creative contribution, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with one's authentic nature. Jung's ultimate message is both simple and profound. We do not need permission to exist authentically. Our responses, our preferences, our perspectives, and our presence have inherent value that requires no external justification. The work of recognizing and reclaiming this inherent worth represents perhaps the most revolutionary act available to human consciousness. The choice to be genuinely oneself in a world that often prefers performance. This revolution begins not with changing others, but with the courageous decision to stop explaining our existence and start living it. It begins with trusting our own experience, expressing our authentic responses, and offering our genuine presence to a world that needs our unique contribution far more than it needs our acceptable performance. In making this choice, we join what Jung called the authentic ones, individuals throughout history who chose genuine expression over social approval, who trusted their own experience over collective opinion, and who contributed to human development through their willingness to be authentically themselves. This authenticity is both our birthright and our responsibility, both our natural state and our conscious choice. The path from explanation compulsion to authentic expression is not easy, but it is always available. It requires courage, patience, and support, but it leads to the profound satisfaction of finally being free to be ourselves. In this freedom, we discover not only our own liberation, but our capacity to contribute to the liberation of authentic human expression itself. Jung's work reminds us that the choice to stop explaining ourselves and start being ourselves is not selfish, but generous. It offers the world the gift of our genuine nature rather than the burden of our strategic performance. This gift, multiplied across individuals who choose authenticity, has the potential to transform human civilization toward greater appreciation for the remarkable diversity and creativity that emerge when people are free to be genuinely themselves. The revolution toward authentic living begins with each individual's courage to exist without explanation, to trust their own experience, and to offer their unique gifts regardless of others' understanding or approval. In this revolution, we discover not only our own freedom, but our power to create a world where authentic human expression is valued, supported, and celebrated as the remarkable gift it has always been.